Hello, everyone. Are we live
Mr. Chairman, you're live.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the afternoon of the Revenue Committee meeting, and it's a pleasure to be here. Before we go, Representative Roscoe, I got your text, and I think our co-chairman did too. And you were describing some computer problems you had during the vote. I don't think it would have made any difference, but you want to say anything before we go forward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I just had kicked the cord out and I ran out of power. And so I didn't, not sure what I missed, but I think I missed the last vote on the exemption for food. I think I my chance.
I think you did miss that vote, Representative Roscoe, and I think the margin between the ayes and nays was more than a single vote.
Yeah, it was, well, 6-7, so it would have been 7-7.
Best it would have been done was a tie. So thank you, Representative Roscoe. Everyone, welcome back. Our next topic is on wind produced electricity, the taxation, sort of the discussion of how we tax wind now. And it just turns out to be a lot more complicated than I thought it was. And I think it's interesting. Folks have been looking into this, and our Department of Revenue and our county assessors have been exploring this. So let's let them talk. I really don't think that this will take as much time as we allocated on the agenda, but that's kind of up to you and your comments and your questions. Please feel free to ask as much as you want. We do have quite a few commenters. If you still feel a need, we'll accommodate every single one of you. So to start off on this, we have Ms. Huxtable is present, and I think that Mr. Noble is present as well. So Ms. Huxtable, can we start with you? And let me just first say thank you very much for all the heavy lifting you've done working with this committee through all sorts of different topics, especially this meeting. And it was really poor timing on our part to have you kind of on the front end and on the back end. And so we're grateful that you stuck around and came to Cheyenne. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. You're welcome, Mr. Chairman. Dixie Huxtable, Converse County Assessor. I'm here as the Converse County Assessor today to talk a little bit about wind production taxation. I want to share some information with you about what we're doing currently as far as taxation. And then I have a few comments to share as well. I'm going to limit this discussion that I am going to partake in the ad valorem tax and the production tax, the wind generation tax. I have a few dollar amounts in here. I just want to declare that those are all publicly available. Nothing was disclosed through my office. It's all public information that I'm sharing today. Any conversation about sales taxes, permits, fees, I'm not going to include that. That's not in my wheelhouse, so that would be up to somebody else to talk about. So where are we at and what's happening in Wyoming right now for property taxes, wind turbine facilities? The wind turbine facilities are required to file their annual report to the Wyoming Department of Revenue by April 1st. There is an extension of time that can be granted to April 15th, and it's my understanding that a lot of them do request that. The county assessors are required by statute to send out their notice of value by the fourth Monday in April. And while we do not send notices to state assessed, a lot of times some of the locally assessed properties are included or a part of that state assessed. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as far as the lands that get capitalized into the value. Once the Department of Revenue receives that application, annual report, they review it, they notify the county assessor what part of those assets are going to be state assessed, what part are going to be locally assessed, and then notify us of that. But obviously there's a little timing issue there from the time they get the report to the time I have to have my notices out is a very small window. Annually on or before the 1st of June, the Department of Revenue certifies to the county assessors of the county in which the property is located an assessed value. So we get an assessed value for electric utilities along with all other state assessed properties. The wind turbines are valued by the Department of Revenue at their fair market value and are assessed at an industrial rate, 11.5%. And that is what's certified by tax district to the counties. County assessor then enters that into our tax rolls. It is used to establish budgets and mill levies. We forward our tax roll to the treasurers, after the mill levy is established, and then the treasurer sends out the tax bills. So that's the process for the property tax. The wind generation tax is as you know, a $1 per megawatt hour, a portion thereof. And there are some exemptions allowed, and it doesn't go into effect until after the third year of production. So in the statutes, it's pretty small statute that covers that. Truthfully, I did not know that till I started doing a little research for this topic. It states that any person producing electricity from wind resources, which is subject to the tax, shall report the amount of megawatt hours produced on or before February 1st of the year immediately following the year of production, and the payment shall be included as well. So the taxes are collected, it's all reported, and they're collected by the Department of Revenue. I would state that there is no specific provisions in statute currently to audit those reports. As far as any of the auditing, that would be a question for the Department of Revenue. There are penalties and interest rates provided in statutes for late filing or delinquent taxes. The generation tax is distributed per statute. Again, this was another interesting topic that I was not fully aware of. So I appreciate getting the opportunity to research this a little. 40% of that tax goes back to the state general fund. 60% is distributed to the counties. Interesting to me is that the distribution back to the counties is based on the assessed value of the facilities in each county. So those facilities are paying the tax based on their production, but the 60% that goes back to the counties is going back based on the assessed value, prorated by county to the whole. So you add up all the assessed value of Converse County's facilities compared to the whole, and we get that percent back.
Can you maybe work an example or something hypothetical?
Certainly, and this information is, I believe, available out there on the DOR's website as well. But for example, a county could be paying in 37% of the wind generation tax and be receiving 43% back. Another county could be paying in the facilities in their county, not the county itself, but the facilities in that county could be paying in 28% of the overall total taxes, but that county is getting back 20% because of the valuation differences in the facilities. They may be older, they may be newer, larger cost involved, a lot of reasons why, which is why I started looking into the assessed value a little bit more. Just out of curiosity, just so you know, those numbers that I just gave you are pretty accurate. I will be the first one to disclaim that Converse County pays in last year's taxes, we paid in about 37% for the facilities in our county.
Say that again.
37.3% of the total tax was paid in by Converse County. Converse County received back 43.8%. And Carbon County is another one I looked at, paid in about 28.6% of the tax and received back 20.8%. So there's a little inequity there when you're looking at the production of the wind, but when you're looking at the assessed value, that's how it's distributed.
So does that mean that your facilities are relatively newer and higher value than Carbon County's?
That would be accurate, Mr. Chairman. As far as I know, certainly my facilities are newer, were put into production after the ones in Carbon County, maybe different sizes. There's a lot of factors involved that I'm not party to. That's a Department of Revenue question probably on how they get that information, how it's reported. Certainly the Department of Revenue values all the properties and provides those values to the Sales and Excise Division for the distribution. I think there is an exception on some of the properties that maybe have multiple facilities, that maybe the department values them as a whole, and I'm going to let them, when it's their turn, they'll talk about that, but they value those properties as that company as a whole, and then the company allocates that value to the different facilities. So I'm not privy to all of that, but in my research, that's what I found out. A couple of other things when I started looking at the assessed value, because that's my wheelhouse, is the assessment and the appraisal. I did ask for a copy of the annual reports just so I could learn, not questioning the value, just learning the process. 3 of the 4 facilities in my county did authorize through the Department of Revenue that I could see those annual reports if I signed a confidentiality statement. 1 company did not. The department graciously got those for me, and I met with them. We had a conversation about their process. And you're absolutely right. What you said to begin with, it's not as simple as it sounds. I am convinced that the department considers all 3 approaches to value as they should in this process. Cost, income, and comparable sales. I don't think we see a lot of sales of these facilities, so that's probably the least applicable methodology. The department does look at an income approach and a cost approach. I'll let them walk you through how that is. I have no access to that. I did get the annual report. I also received a model, an example of what an appraisal might look like, but I do not have access to see what the actual appraisals for the companies in my county. So I would defer that to them. A couple things that I just want to comment on is I started looking, where could I find that value other than what's certified to me to the state? I started going to the industrial siting application permits because there are some numbers in there that I thought would be very informational, and they were. Certainly that application will tell you when it's met, when that project has met or exceeded their threshold. The one that I was looking at met its, at that time, the threshold was 173.2 million. The applicant met it, therefore it was in the process of being considered for the industrial siting process. Another interest that I thought was entertaining was that it gives you the ad valorem, the estimated ad valorem taxes that are going to be paid. And in this particular facility, they estimated over a 5-year period. They were estimating $13 million in property taxes would be paid based on that estimate. And when I went to look up that property to compare those same 5 years, the actual taxes paid was $8.5 million. So it begged me the question, they estimated in their industrial siting application that it would be a $13 million ad valorem tax payment over 5 years, and the actual was 8.5. So I began to wonder, was it just overestimated in the application, which I don't know, or are we undervaluing them and not collecting enough tax? Don't know. I just thought it was interesting reading that that's what was estimated when they were projecting the facility. And certainly things change. I'm absolutely aware of that. Things never turn out the way that you originally planned them. So I understand that. But without knowing how the assessed values are calculated, actually, I can't comment on whether those assessed values are appropriate or not. I want to touch a little bit on the leased land. That's been a question that I've been asked. 3 of the 4 facilities in my county have privately leased land underneath those facilities. So by statute, the Department of Revenue is required to consider leased assets to be taxed as if they're owned. And I'm sure Mr. Noble will address that as well. But what they do in this case is they take those lease payments for those land acres and they capitalize that lease payment into the total value of the facility. Again, I have some rudimentary idea of how that's done, and I've seen some numbers, but I don't know the exact appraisal numbers, and I would never want to disclose those anyway, but I'm just not comfortable that I can explain the entire process to you. But what I can tell you is that what I have seen, that capitalized lease payment that's capitalized into the total value far exceeds any agricultural value I would have been able to assess on that land. Significantly exceeds. I don't even know if I could exponentially put the decimals in there, because we are valuing agricultural land, and all of it in my county is sitting as if it would be agricultural if it didn't have those wind farms on it. Mm-hmm. And that's at production value, as we've discussed at length for a couple of days. The department is capitalizing those lease payments into an industrial value that's getting taxed at 11.5%. The ag value would have been 9.5%. So there's just, the exponentially is, I'm just going to tell you that those lease payments are added into the value of that facility, and they're at a much higher rate than I would be valuing if I was putting them in ag. I just wanted to clear that up because I think that's a little bit confusing. And so when the department capitalizes those lease payments, then I am required to take them off my local tax roll.
Right.
That's that timing issue you have. I'll get the notice about May 21st, or excuse me, April 21st. Here's the list of assets that we're gonna value statewide. You need to pull them off the tax roll. It doesn't give me very much time to get them off before I have to send my notices out. So that timing is a little frustrating on my part. Once the facility is built, those lease payments don't change a lot, or at least we don't see the acres change a lot. So once you've pulled them off, it's, you know, other than every year having to review it to make sure you have it properly, that initial year is kind of frustrating. To have to pull tens of thousands of acres off of a local tax roll. Because if you pull it off and just remove them totally without putting some kind of explanation, sometimes those owners think we're taking their land away from them and they tend to get a little frustrated. And so we want to make sure we show that they own the land. We're just not taxing it locally. The land is taxed, but it's through the facility. Another thing that certainly the Department of Revenue will have to address is depreciation. Cost approach, as I mentioned, is one of the approaches they rely on heavily for this industry. When you're doing a cost approach, there's forms of depreciation you must include. Besides, there's physical, functional, external. I don't know what they're using for physical. I don't know if the department knows what, you know, the lifespan of that assets, how they're depreciating, and I can't answer that. That's their question. They are applying, in most cases that I could see, an external obsolescence factor that they arrive at, I think, using some market adjustments. And I just want to state that's absolutely appropriate. I mean, in appraisal methodology, you have to consider those. So that is not unusual. It's not extraordinary, and it happens in all of the state assists that they do. I'm not just talking wind turbines, but how they calculate that adjustment is something I don't know. You'll have to ask the department for that. We don't have any say in the value of those facilities. It all comes from the state. However, we did do a little limited research on how other states handle these. And it is limited. There's a lot of information out there. The Park County Assessor, Pat Meyer, did some of this research, and I know he has it available for anybody that would like to see some of that.
So, Ms. Huxtable, I've shared that with the committee, and I'm sending it to Josh right now. I'm hoping we can get that put on the website so the public can view that.
Okay, if at a time you want to talk that, I would certainly encourage Mr. Meyer to get on with this, because he's the one that gathered that information.
Yeah, I'm hoping he's listening, and he said he would be available.
I thought it was interesting on one of the articles that he found, a study was done that indicated that Wyoming is the 4th lowest cost state of all the states that have wind energy. I'll let him follow up on that because he's the one that gathered the research. But I want to make a statement that it's important to remember that there's multiple types of taxes that you have to consider when you're looking at the whole tax pool. Real property, personal property, production taxes, permits, fees, all those things. And that's true of any industry, not just the wind, but every industry. So when you're looking at whether or not you need to change the tax or raise the tax or do anything different, my goal was to educate you on what you're doing now to the best of my ability. It's a little bit complicated, but make sure you understand what you're doing now and that you're looking at all the taxes before you decide which ones need to be revised. From my perspective, the distribution of that wind generation tax was interesting. I'm not opposed to it. I just was surprised by it. So I just thought it was important that you all know. And since the distribution is based on assessed value, it piqued my interest. I presumed it was being distributed based on the production, and that was a bad presumption on my part because that's not how it's being distributed. I think that another comment that I would just add when you're looking at all this is we are a self-reporting state, and we've heard that a lot for a lot of different entities. Business, personal property, mineral production, a lot of stuff is self-reported. In most cases, we've learned over the years how to monitor that. I'm not sure that we have the stuff in place to monitor for the wind. I don't see it in the statutes. Maybe it's there, maybe it's being done. I just don't see it. I just want to make sure that we have the proper language wherever we need it to be able to monitor it as this industry grows, which we think it's going to. At least based on the wind in my part of the country, it is. It's just important that we have our ducks in a row. We know what we're doing and where we want to go forward and how we're going to administer it, because it is important that we keep all those factors in play when we're thinking of changes, and that we're looking at all the taxes, not just the property or the generation or business, personal property, looking at everything. So that's kind of a down and dirty of what I have. I hope it was informative, and I'm certainly willing to stand for questions. I think the department will probably chime in with some of the valuation specifics. And correct me if I've misstated something. I hope they do that, but I would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Assessor Huxtable. And let's see what the committee has to, if they have questions. Committee, any questions for Ms. Huxtable? I see Representative Sweeney. We'll start there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just curious when you said about the assessment of the land. In general, is it just the land that the base sits on, which would be under an acre per turbine, or is it the entire field that might be 500 acres, let's say?
Ms. Huxtable.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Sweeney, good question. The lease payment is what's being capitalized and adding back into the value. So what is ever included in that lease payment is what I am taking off of the local tax roll. And so that is the entire leased acres. And it is certainly more than the base of the turbine. I'm sure somebody can explain how many acres they have to lease or why they would lease more acres than that better than I would. But what I can tell you is what we're taking off of the locally assessed roll is all the acres included in the lease payments. So if they are leasing 17,000 acres for that farm, that wind farm, but they really probably only have a footprint of maybe 1,500 to 2,000 acres, we are pulling 17,000 acres off of the local tax roll because of the capitalized. Now, remember I said that the capitalized value is significantly more than what I could be taxing it anyway, but I want to make that very clear, but we are pulling the full 17,000 acres off, just not the footprint.
Anything else?
If I could, so really in your mind, you've got a project, a very large project going on north of Douglas there. And so in your opinion, doing it this way, there's really no way to game the system, because they would have to lease and then it be capitalized acreage, not just where the foundation sits for one particular unit.
Ms. Huxtable, do you have a?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Sweeney, I think some of that question may be tied to the Department of Revenue because they're the one that actually sees the documents that come from the taxpayer, whether they look at those leases to see what's included, is the land including just the footprint or including, bigger parcel. I can't answer that. All I know is I get that list from the Department of Revenue, and whether they get it from the actual lease, I can't answer that question.
Assessor Huxtable, when you capitalize it, it's a annual payment for the lease, and it is taxed at 9.5%, like you say. But if it becomes capitalized, there would be assumptions about how it's capitalized. The number of years it probably applied to. There's probably some financial discount factor. I mean, it seems like if it's capitalized, it may or may not be the equivalent amount of money, even though we do agree that it's 11.5% versus 9.5%, and that seems obvious on its face. But the assumptions about how it's capitalized, I think, would be important in saying whether we get more money or less.
Mr. Chairman, good question. I can't really answer that because that is something that the Department of Revenue does. The paperwork I've seen leads me to believe that the annual payment is capitalized by using an annual cap rate for that industry to determine a value to add back into the cost basis. Certainly, the Department of Revenue should be able to help you with that and understand the assumptions are there. Mine are pretty broad, but that's how they're doing it.
Thank you, Ms. Huxtable. So I think how that cap rate is capitalized or is figured out would tell us whether it's more or less or the same. So any other questions from the committee for Ms. Huxtable? Any other questions from the committee for Ms. Huxtable? Ms. Huxtable, can I ask a question about other state assessed property in Converse County or that you're aware of? Is it, how familiar, you know, you're the assessor, right? And this is about money that is to be returned to your county. So you have a very important role, even though you're not the actually doing the assessment of state assessed property. Seems like you would be part and parcel of how that is figured. Is that true for most? I mean, you'd be able to look at the calculations, decide if it's appropriate, maybe challenge the department on assumptions. Would that be more normal with state assessed property and it's different for these properties? Do you understand what I'm trying to get at?
I do, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
They are treating this industry the same as all state assessed. So this is not, me not being able to see those reports is not specific to the wind industry.
Okay.
That is true for all state assessed. And there's some history behind that maybe Mr. Director Noble can address as well, that because by statute, it's the state's responsibility to value, then all questions should be to the state. That there's been an opinion in the back that the county assessors don't have the right to challenge because the state was given that authority to set the value. So we would love to see some of the calculations and not just to challenge the value. That's not really always what we're looking for. Sometimes absolutely it is, but mostly to understand what's included. When you get a list from the state that says, this is what we're valuing and you need to value this piece of property. We have no idea why they excluded that or why they included some of the other. If it's part of that operation, then it should be included in the state valuation. But if it's not, you know, I've been given a paper that says there's a 40-acre parcel sitting in the middle of kind of nowhere that's not being used by, in that case, the pipeline anymore. Mm-hmm. So you need to value it. So, but I don't know why that decision was made. The pipeline runs beside it, so I'm not sure I understand it, but I'm not allowed to really ask those questions because I don't have standing on state assessed values. Would love to have that, but right now, based on the decisions and the situation in the statutes, the state is fairly adamant that they cannot share that information with me.
See. We'll explore that more with Mr. Noble too. So. Thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Huxtable at this time? Ms. Huxtable, we stay close. We might have some back and forth after we learn more from the department. If that's okay with you, sure. If you don't mind. Okay, committee, shall we go to, I'm sorry about my phone, it's making noises. Can we go to the Department of Revenue? And Mr. Noble, welcome. How are you?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doing great. Members of the committee, Dan Noble, Director of the Department of Revenue. I'll tell you, Ms. Huxtable did a yeoman's work as it relates to the description of the process. I think she didn't miss anything. I will probably just add a little bit as it relates to the wind generation tax. Currently, the wind generation tax amounts to about $4.2 million a year. Of that, $2.5 million is returned to the counties, as Ms. Huxtable said, based on the assessed value of where the electricity was generated, and the other remaining $1.6 million to $1.7 million goes back to the state, is retained in the state's general fund. She's also right as it relates to how the wind projects are valued. It is a state assessed property, and the people here at the state that actually do that calculation are here with me today, and I'm going to let them speak to some of the specifics as it relates to the process. But they use a unitary approach to valuing the property. It is something that is looked at three different ways. As Ms. Huxtable said, there is not enough comparable sales to actually even be considered, so we don't typically use that. But we also look at the income approach and the cost approach to assessing the value. Those are two recognized approaches for doing this very process. And some of the questions that were asked was, why is it the state assessed property would be done, segregated from others? I think a lot of this has to do with when we're talking about state assessed property, is that you may have cross-jurisdictional issues that we want to make sure that we value and segregate those values appropriately, and I think that's why it's been done. As it relates to the confidentiality issues, those are in statute and something that we pretty much have to abide by that. Obviously, we don't want to share the data with somebody. It's the fact that it does require consent by the companies. Some of them allow it, some of them don't. And that's just something, the way that the operation of the statute requires that. That's how it's done today. I think probably the best thing to do is to entertain any questions you have as it relates to process and stuff like that. And I'll turn it over to the experts to answer the questions directly as it relates to different aspects of it. The one thing that was brought up was how do we handle the leases of property on these wind farms, and she was right. We do capitalize it, and we base it on that current year's cap rate that is established in conjunction with review of the cap rates for the industries, and we actually the state actually sets that value, and I'll let them talk to the specifics of that. And actually, we actually have a hearing, a cap rate hearing once a year to meet with the industry folks and discuss what rates are being set and how we arrived at that. So I can certainly allow any of these folks to answer the questions you may have, but I wanted to give you the 30,000 foot level, and we can certainly answer specifics if you'd like.
I think that sounds like a great plan, Mr. Noble. Let's see if the committee has questions at this point. I'm not seeing any, so Mr. Noble, let's start with the statute that says that the generation tax should be split based on the assessed valuation in the particular counties.
Mm-hmm.
I think that caught some folks off guard. Can you tell me why? Maybe you don't know, but if you know, why do we do it that way and not based on the actual generation?
Mr. Chairman, I think both approaches were looked at when this happened, when the tax was imposed. I think it was just and I can't even remember exactly why one was chosen over the other. We actually capture both. We capture the amount of generation by county, and we also capture the assessed value as well. And that's obviously how Ms. Huxtable made that determination, is because it is readily available information. We can certainly provide it. But it is something that I can't say that I know why we chose one methodology for allocation over the other. It's just, that's the way it ended up.
Can you speculate as what the impacts of that are?
Mr. Chairman, I'd probably have to go through the actual reports and look at it to see what the difference would be, but I can certainly do that. I can go through that exercise and see what the variance is. And as Ms. Huxtable said, it probably will vary by county. When you consider, let's look at Carbon County. There's probably quite a few old assets in Carbon County right now. The Foot Creek projects were fairly early 2000s, I believe. So they're probably close to full depreciation, as opposed to some of the projects in Converse County, which are much newer. That's probably a very reasonable assumption as to why this would vary as much as it does.
Mr. Noble, I think you're exactly right. I'm looking around to see if the committee has any other questions, but if we think about the vintage versus the production, I think that tells us that the valuation of these assets falls off in terms of the production. So they're still making electricity, but the assessed value is declines, even though they're producing the exact same amount of electricity. I think we can infer that from this divergence that's happening. And I think that has some implications for our tax policy as well. I see Representative Sweeney has a question. Let's get him, unless you want to comment on what I just said first, Mr. Noble.
Mr. Chairman, one thing and it's only because I remember hearing testimony a couple, maybe 3 years ago, about the fact that the actual productivity of a turbine itself will fall off with age as well, that will not produce quite as much as electricity. I don't know how much that declination is, but I'm sure there's probably some industry experts in the room that can talk about whether or not a turbine that's 1 year old produces the same amount of electricity as a turbine that's 20 years old. I think there's probably some fall off in the amount of electricity that can be generated.
True, but if it matched the rate of assessed value, it would be more equivalent. And it seems to be quite a difference. I do agree with you. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if we take the land lease and we capitalize the land lease, and then that relationship has a bearing on the assessed value of that land lease, therefore taxed at 11.5%. Now we're depreciating that. Is that also depreciating the assessed valuation that they would pay on an annual basis at the same time? Or does the assessed valuation of the property, just like I pay on my house, remain constant?
Mr. Noble, if you can.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to turn this one over to the expert. With me today is David Frank. He is in charge of state assessment of these very properties, and he can probably at least walk you through why this may vary over time. I think one of the things that you might want to recognize is that the approach to assessing this value is not like it is on your home. It is an income approach to value, and it does recognize some of the things that make income either go up or go down. But I'll turn this over to him so he can kind of give you an explanation of how that works.
Okay, and would you introduce him again? I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name.
Mr. Chairman, his name is David Frank. He's our state assessor for these types of properties.
Welcome. Welcome, Mr. Frank.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, if I may, I do have to throw out a disclaimer here that Director Noble may smack me for later. I just got assigned electric utilities this summer, so I'm still learning myself. When some of these questions started coming up, I started digging through the appraisal files from the prior appraiser. And in looking at this, in the cost approach, we use the historical cost less depreciation, and then add in those capitalized lease payments for the land value. From there, from that total value, we use the income and income shortfall to account for external obsolescence. That's obsolescence outside of the property itself. And then that obsolescence is applied to that total. And it's, like I said, it's based on the income. Any of the appraisal texts you read are going to tell you that all the approaches to value are interrelated and interdependent. So if you have an appraisal that comes back with a cost approach that is 3 times what your income approach is, one or the other is wrong, and you need to go back and do some recalibrating and try and figure out what's what. But anyway, once that's done, we also, as Dixie mentioned, we run an income approach. We capitalize the company's net operating income using the established cap rates by industry. And at the end, the appraiser then weighs the merits of each approach and applies weighting to each approach to come up with a final determination of value. And I guess that's my spiel in a nutshell. If you have more questions, please ask.
So we got Representative Sweeney. Go ahead, Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So to be clear, if I'm paying $100 property tax today, and is that 15 years from now without any adjustments because of utilizing, having capitalized that lease rate and looking at all of this, am I still paying $100 even 10 years from now, let alone 20? Or is that going to constantly be declining?
Mr. Frank.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Sweeney, that's going to vary because we use components of each approach in other approaches. So if your income stream remains steady over that time period, you may lose a little bit in value due to depreciation, but if that income stream stays the same or goes up, you're going to have less obsolescence applied to those costs. So
Meaning the value may go up.
Yes. Yes.
Which means the value may go up.
Say that again. We didn't hear it.
Which means that the value may actually go up instead of down.
It could be either way, couldn't it?
Yes. Yes. You can have economic obsolescence. You can also have economic enhancement. And in looking through these, I do have I think it was 3 or 4 companies that they were older wind farms that actually had economic enhancement applied in the cost approach due to the income that they were still earning.
Representative Sweeney, I can see you reaching.
Okay, so, but you mentioned that the actual land lays outside the obsolescence. Did I understand that correctly?
No, sir. That land would receive a portion of that obsolescence.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Or the enhancement.
I'm just trying to understand why couldn't we have developed a method whereby the lease payments maybe were stayed as the local assessed part, for example, and rolled in like other lease payments?
You could, but we would have to change the statute. And that statute does state that leased equipment of essentially assessed properties are to be included in our value and assessed at the state level.
And what is that normally thinking about? Examples, industry. This with the land seems different to me.
It could be right-of-ways, office equipment. I used to be in charge of telecom valuation. For a lot of those, they're paying other companies to lease space on their towers, co-location sites, anything really. If they're leasing retail space for a cellular store, anything used in the operation of that company should be included in what we assess.
Okay. Committee? Got a couple, Mr. Representative Sweeney.
Thank you. And I'm just going to read this. It was a letter that I believe the entire committee received back in September, and get your reaction to these comments. You know, good, bad, or indifferent. And this is on a potential project. First, the project will lease private agricultural lands and expects its landowner or lessors to continue to pay the large majority of their real estate property taxes at agricultural rates, far below the rates for industrial and residential real property. Second, the project includes leases of state lands. The county cannot tax state lands, although it can tax improvements on state lands. Do you have an opinion if, in what you're describing and what Dixie described, I don't see how that's possible. Would you, and I'm wondering because this tended to look like a loophole that a potential company looking to site something here in Wyoming could have found. And after listening to Dixie's explanation, I don't see where that is really true. What would be your opinion? I know you didn't see the whole letter, so
Mr. Chairman, Representative Sweeney, I think it's probably an assumption that was made that it was being taxed at agricultural rates. As you've seen from what process we're describing here, it is not taxed at an agricultural rate. It's taxed at industrial rates, and that the lease itself, and we're talking about the properties that these farms are on, the lease itself is capitalized as part of the process. So it's industrial property, not ag, and is taxed accordingly.
So Representative Sweeney, is that the letter from Al Manier that you're referring to?
Well, yes.
That's a letter that Mr. Manier sent to the State Land Board, and I believe I've shared that letter with the committee and with, of course, the assessors. So we're all trying to really understand that. I think he's kind of rethinking about that, I suppose. I am curious, Mr. Noble, what about the comments in the letter about the state lands, and how does that work? And I think, Mr. Noble, I shared that letter with you.
You did, Mr. Chairman. I think the issue with obviously state lands is that it's not taxable anyway.
Right.
State lands would not be subject to tax. So I guess the question though, if it's leased, would we capitalize it?
See, I guess that's the point. Is is it part of the value of the project or not?
We're asking that question as you speak. I'll tell you what, we will research it and get back to you with it.
Fair enough. I think that's
Mr. Chairman,
sweet.
I believe it should be taxed as part of the project. In whether it's a state section or not, in my mind, in these projects, that should be considered. So
Capitalize the lease payment.
I agree with you, but Mr. Noble, go ahead.
After a little debate, I think that the consensus was that we would tax the lease payments and capitalize it just like we would anything else, because it's talking about the lease as part of an income approach. So whether or not it's on state land or not, the lease itself is what we're looking at, and the lease payments would be subject to that capitalization at the cap rate and then considered part of the taxable property. It's really, when you look at the statute itself, it's looking at the lease and taxing it as if it was owned, if you will. So I think that's probably how we would view it. And we will get that nailed down. If we can find one of the assessments where there was state land involved, we'll certainly look at it. But I believe, based on an understanding of how the statute reads, it really doesn't even speak to who owns it. It talks about the lease itself, and I think that's probably how it would be taxed.
Right. So, okay, that'd be great. Thank you. Committee members, everybody else? I have a couple of questions about, one is the confidentiality. So I'm trying to figure this out. If I go to my local assessor's office, and most of them seem to be have this thing called a map serve, and you can click on that map serve and you can look at the actual physical boundaries of real estate, and you can go in and you can even find out who owns that real estate, and you can find out how much the taxes are on that real estate. And that's true for as far as I know, everything in Wyoming. So I'm trying to understand how it's similar or dissimilar for the taxes that industrial property pays, such as a wind farm.
Mr. Chairman, I think one of the things we probably want to look at is the information that we receive from these companies isn't just about the land that they own in Wyoming. It can very well involve the income that they generate across the entire country. And I think that probably creates some of the need for some level of confidentiality, because this income that is being provided to us is used in valuation, but it isn't necessarily even Wyoming money. We have to allocate the overall value as to what is income was produced in the state of Wyoming from income that was produced across the entire country. So I think that the confidentiality statute that was contemplated for this is a little different than your just normal property and the value that is located in a certain area. But it is a statutory provision, and I think it was put in place to make sure that that type of information is only shared if the company agrees to it. Is that a fair? Go ahead.
May I, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Frank, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, even at the local level, any taxpayer provided information is confidential. So in Ms. Huxtable's case, any business reporting personal property to the assessor, she can't give out that information. That's confidential at the county level as well.
Mr. Frank, though, can't I get the information about how much taxes were paid on the personal property?
Yes, and that at the state level, I can tell you what the assessed value is for any of our department assessed companies. But any of the company provided information relating to income or cost or balance sheets or any of that, that's all confidential.
So if I were trying to challenge the level of taxation and say, for example, that they're paying too much taxes or too little taxes, I seem to not have a leg to stand on other than I would know the total amount of taxes, and that would be about it.
Companies have every right to. Mr. Chairman, I think.
Go ahead, Mr. Miller.
I think one of the things that maybe is confusing here is that the taxpayer themselves would have every right to see how the value was assessed. Okay. What we're talking about is releasing that information to third parties. We cannot do that without their permission, and it actually contemplates the ability of asking for that. And then, of course, when you end up in the court system, that can be sheltered in any hearings, but can be subpoenaed at that point.
Has it always been the case that information was not shared with the local assessors?
I'm aware of it, as long as I'm aware of it, Mr. Chairman.
Seems like they would have an interest in seeing that the appropriate amount of taxes are collected for their counties. but they don't have standing? That's a question. Did you hear it?
Mr. Chairman, I think that that's probably something that could certainly be visited.
Thank you. In regards to the upgrades that we're seeing happening, I think right in Rocky Mountain Power's case, they're calling it repowering, where they're taking wind turbines that and they're putting new blades and nacelles on the turbine structures and getting really a more efficient, bigger, more productive asset. How does the tax, what are the tax implications of that, both for the generation tax and for the property tax?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that as it relates to the generation tax, that issue's been visited with a couple of the companies already, and we view it as ongoing production of electricity as opposed to a new plant being exempted for the first 3 years. Hasn't been litigated, but it is that's been our standing and our advice from the Attorney General's office about it. So that's how it's been. That's how the correspondence has been written back to them, is that this is ongoing production. As it relates to what happens to from a property tax perspective, I'll let them speak to it, but I would assume it's an enhancement of some sort of the value, and it has to be included in the overall value, but I'll turn it over to David for that.
Mr. Chairman, any new equipment, the value of that would be included in the plant and service. If it's construction work in progress, that is also included. So we would capture that in the cost. And if that made any improvements as far as their productive capabilities, if they were able to produce 5 megawatts instead of 2, I would assume that that would also show up in their income stream, which would then trickle down into the appraisal.
Okay, thank you. In regards to the generation tax, and it's a new machine on top of an old tower, at what point, Mr. Noble, would it be an entirely new machine? If they replace the tower or what?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think the issue with the generation tax is that we're not really looking at, we're talking about a wind project. The first 3 years of production on a wind project is exempt from the tax. Beyond that, you're talking about an individual tower. Now, granted, it may produce more electricity, which generates more tax. I mean, but it is not something where we look at this as an entirely new project just because you put new turbines on the existing site. It's already a wind project. There's much more that goes into that project other than just the turbine. You've got all of the infrastructure to support it. You've got all of the lines that feed from the turbines to your I don't know what they call it, the substations and out to the to where it's going to be consumed. So I think we don't look at that as a new project.
Fair enough. Okay, thank you. Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wouldn't you have to recapitalize?
Mr. Noble.
Mr. Chairman, I would assume that's probably something a company does every day. I mean, they capitalize all sorts of different items as well. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a new project.
I think maybe Representative Sweeney, were you thinking about recapitalizing in terms of the ad valorem tax and the figures going into that?
Mr. Chairman, that actually is added back into the overall cost approach, if you will. You're adding whatever that new value is that's being added to the project, and then it's captured at its new value.
And with regards to the project, if a project evolves over time, And, you know, some of the equipment's replaced, some isn't. Do you do your analysis at the project level, or is it, Mr. Frank, I think this is for you. Do you break it down by the turbine level?
It's the unit as a whole, Mr. Chairman.
You mean the whole project? I just want to be careful.
Yes.
Okay. So all of your assumptions, your schedules evolve around the project itself, not the individual turbine units.
Yes, sir.
That's helpful. So any other questions by the committee? Mr. Noble and just the Department of Revenue in general, how can we get our local assessors better comfort about how this is coming about, short of the confidentiality thing? I mean, can they look at more detail of how the calculations are done, maybe with examples instead of real numbers or something? And is that something you could actually share with the committee, how it comes about? It could be a hypothetical, as I'm concerned, but
Mr. Chairman, we're an open book as it relates to how we approach this process, and we share that with the assessors. Actually, that's exactly what happened with Ms. Huxtable just a couple of weeks ago. We sat down with her and walked her through the process itself. So, and it wasn't even examples. The companies that were willing to let us provide her with that data, we walked through that process as part of our meeting. And that's not something that we're going to deny anybody of. We'll certainly let them know exactly how we arrived at the numbers that we did. We just can't share the confidential piece of that unless the taxpayer allows us to do so.
and that's absolutely fair enough. And I understand that that discussion that you had with Ms. Huxtable involved 4 companies, 3 of which said it was okay to look at the data and 1 that didn't. That's all fair enough. But I'm wondering if you could provide us with sort of maybe a handout about how you actually do it, and maybe give some examples about how property tax rates amounted each year and how a lease feeds into that. And just so we can get a better understanding of really what's going on. PowerPoint of some sort. Is that a possibility? Can we press that?
Mr. Chairman, we could certainly provide you with a PowerPoint on exactly how we go about this process.
Yeah, well, I'd like that. I think it'd be helpful.
All right.
Anything else from the committee? Anything else now? Mr. Noble, have you seen I'm not sure how widely it's been handed out, but Mr. Meyer up in Cody, he looked at tax rates all across the country, and he concluded that our property tax rates were kind of on the low end. But I think he's going to share that with us at the next meeting. But have you speculated on some of that or looked at how other states do it?
Mr. Chairman, I haven't seen what Mr. Myers has provided to you. One thing that I will point out is that the fact that property taxes are 4th from the lowest as it relates to wind projects could probably be, that same argument can be made across everything that we tax with the exception of minerals. We are extremely low as it relates to our property taxation in general.
Yeah, I think I got the gist of that. It was a little muffled. I'm sorry.
I think the statement that Wyoming is about 4th lowest in taxation as it relates to wind farms could probably be applied to virtually everything that we tax with the exception of possibly minerals.
Gotcha. Do you think we could flesh that out a little better? Maybe you could look at what Mr. Meyer did and maybe give us a little bit of input on that.
Mr. Chairman, is his presentation on the website? I'll certainly look at it if that's the case.
Get it on the website. I don't think it has been yet.
Okay. I'll certainly look at it.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions, committee? Thank you very much, Mr. Noble. We really appreciate your folks and really do want to learn more how you do this.
Okay. Great.
Any other questions? Okay, any public comment on this issue? Katie, are you working the public comment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm letting them in now.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking. Ms. Choquette, welcome. Well, can we start with you? Is that all right? You're muted, ma'am.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we certainly can. Welcome.
Excellent. Thank you so much. My name is Kara Choquette. I work for two companies, Power Company of Wyoming, developing a large wind farm south of Rollins in Carbon County, and Transwest Express LLC, which is developing a transmission line to connect Wyoming to new markets in the West. And I had just a few answers to, I think, some of the questions that the committee was discussing just now on these various issues. One of them was, I think, the discussion about how the property taxes compare. I have not seen the document that has or will be posted to the LSO website, but the University of Wyoming has taken a look at that totality of the taxes across the 11 Western states where we would compete as an independent wind energy developer. And when you look at all three of those tax streams that Ms. Huxtable discussed, so the property taxes, the sales and use taxes, and the generation tax, Wyoming's state tax per megawatt hour is approximately, or a minimum of $3.05. And you go down to Colorado, which is $1.57. So Wyoming's total tax burden per megawatt hour for wind is the highest among all the Western states, even including the various, say, rates of property taxes and what those are assessed at. The second thing I wanted to help the committee with is there was a discussion about how the generation tax and why it is distributed the way that it is. So I've been working on this project since 2009, so let me take you back to 2009 briefly. In 2009, the legislature reimposed the sales and use tax on wind energy projects, so the sales and use tax exemption that we had went away. That was done in part to address impacts, and so that made sure that the way the sales tax is distributed, there was money for the state governments and for the local governments, specifically the county and the municipalities. When the generation tax was then imposed in 2010, one of the rationales back then was, again, to help address impacts. And so it was a policy decision by legislators at the time, because just as you have discussed, the idea was that those projects with a higher assessed valuation are those newer projects, so that newer multi-million-dollar capital investment in a community. So they chose to tip the balance of the generation tax toward those counties that had the newer projects. So the idea was that those counties would have a little bit of additional money, again, over time. And so that balance has changed as you've seen that generation tax paid over the years. So as we've talked about, I think a little bit with the new wind projects going in Carbon County this year, in Converse County and Laramie County, and the generation tax, which is paid the February following the year of the generation, you'll probably see that balance tip a little bit, and more of that money will be going to Carbon County. Its assessed valuation will be higher, Converse County with those new projects, and then Laramie County as well. So I hope that background on that rationale, the policy decision at the time is helpful. So I was there and part of those. I feel like I got muted there at the end. I hope you caught the end of what I had to say. Did you hear what I had to say at the end?
No.
Did that cut out? I think I got muted at the end. I just had said I tried to explain why the balance of the generation tax was tipped the way that it was, and I'm happy to answer any questions on that if the committee would like. I can't hear you, Chairman Case. Can anyone hear me? I can't hear you
Yeah.
all.
Oh, Ms. Choquette, I'm so sorry, but we had a technical glitch and you froze on our screen. I think everything here in Cheyenne froze, including our audience. So we had to come back on. So would you just, we did hear a little bit of your beginning, a minute or two. I would hate to, you were talking for a long time without us hearing you, and I'd like you to be able to have your time. So
I appreciate that. I'm sorry for talking over you. I think it's the connection. My apologies.
Just start. Can you start again?
Sure. Again, my name is Kara. I work for Power Company of Wyoming and Transwest Express, two companies developing wind and transmission. I was part of the conversations that happened back in 2009 and 10 when the sales and use tax was reimposed on sales or on wind generation projects, as well as when the generation tax was imposed in 2010. And so I wanted to offer the committee some insights into why the legislature made those decisions at the time. The sales and use tax, when it was reimposed, part of the rationale was to have money available to address local government impacts. Most of the money from the sales tax, as you know, goes to the county and municipalities within the county. The generation tax, when that was added, again, was intended to be a little extra layer of revenue. The cake of the revenue is really that property tax that we talked about earlier, with the sales and use tax, and then the generation tax. At the time, legislators talked about that providing a little bit of additional money to address impacts over time. They chose as a policy decision to tip the balance of the generation tax toward those counties with the higher assessed valuation of wind, recognizing that those are the counties that had the newer projects and therefore had those impacts because those were the newer projects that had been installed. So they decided to tip the balance toward those newer counties. So what I had said before is that you will probably see in the next tranche of generation tax revenue that the balance will be shifted a little bit higher to Carbon County, Converse County, and Laramie County with the new wind projects that are going into service there in 2020. So I thought that background may be helpful for the committee's understanding on those property tax issues. I don't know if the topic of increasing the generation tax will be discussed. I'm happy to provide testimony on that now, but if that's planned to come up later, I'm also happy to wait to bring up those points then.
I'm not planning on bringing that up today. I think we have Dr. Hallinan's bill. I think we'll be taking that up at the next meeting.
Mr. Chairman, that would be good to know, because I believe at the August meeting, the statement was made that the bill would be for consideration at this meeting. If there could be clarity provided on that, that would be helpful.
I think I'm providing it right now. We won't be taking that up today.
I'm sorry.
I believe two of our members had to leave early as well, right?
So we don't have a bill on the website or anything like that. So we won't be taking that up. Ms. Choquette, are you done? Can you hear us? We froze up again. Okay.
Yes, if the committee has any questions, I'm happy to address them.
Committee questions for Ms. Choquette. Ms. Choquette, I've got one. Can you speculate on why the difference in the assessed valuations would be different, for example, between the industrial siting application and then what's actually happens? I can think of a lot of reasons, but is that normal?
Mr. Chairman, I am not able to speculate on that. Our project is still under development. We don't have the privilege yet of having wind turbines installed. That would be those active and existing projects that are going forward in Wyoming right now.
And Ms. Choquette, so you of course mentioned the University of Wyoming study that looked at property taxes comparison across the states. I think that at the next meeting, we're going to have this analysis, and it'll be on our website very soon, that we actually are one of the lowest states for property tax. And that doesn't exactly jive with what the University of Wyoming study concluded. So we'll be interested, I think, in your input on that, but it sort of matches the differential between the industrial siting numbers and the actual numbers on the ground.
Mr. Chairman, the numbers that I read from the University of Wyoming study were looking at the totality of the taxes. So they considered the cost or the tax burden for property taxes, sales and use taxes, and the generation tax. And when all of those factors are combined, Wyoming, among the interior Western states, had the highest per megawatt hour cost of taxation at a minimum of $3.05 per megawatt hour. The lowest end of the range was Colorado at $1.57.
Do you know the assumptions that went into that about property tax?
I don't know that off the top of my head. They are clearly spelled out in the University of Wyoming study that was presented to the Revenue Committee in 2016, as well as part of a subsequent study the University of Wyoming provided to this committee in 2019.
Yeah, I think we will probably need to look at that. I appreciate it, Ms. Choquette. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else for Ms. Choquette? Representative Hallinan, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Choquette, how much does California pay per megawatt hour?
Ms. Choquette.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Hallinan, thank you for the question. I would answer that in a couple of different ways. First of all, what we are is a wholesale power producer, or seeking to be a wholesale power producer. So we do not yet have contracts for the power that our projects would be able to generate and deliver. The current power purchase prices in California are about anywhere from $35 to $40 a megawatt hour. Unfortunately, we also have to consider the cost of delivery to the market. And as you know, with other Wyoming resources, it's always a challenge, is reaching those distant markets. There's a cost to that. And so we do not have a specific power purchase price that I can provide to you. But in general, it's in the $40 range in California. We have to provide the cost of transmission as well. Earlier studies looked at if you were to not consider the cost of transmission, the cost would be around $20, which has fallen precipitously from when we started project development. The wholesale price for a megawatt hour of wind energy was easily north of $100. So while the cost or the price you can get for this product sold from Wyoming has gone down, our cost to do business has certainly gone up with the tax increases already imposed through previous legislative decisions.
Thank you. Anything else? Any other questions for Ms. Choquette? Thank you so much, Ms. Choquette. Let's go to Ms. Bach from the City of Rawlins.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Joint Revenue Committee members. Thank you for your continued service to your committees in the state of Wyoming. For the record, my name is Amy Bach. I'm honored to represent the City of Rawlins. Here today, we also have Carbon County Commissioner Dr. Moore, as well as Council Member-elect Terry Wykeham, who served on the Wind Energy Task Force, our City Manager, Sean Metcalf, and municipal staff as well. First, turning to the presentation today, the City of Rawlins just wants to be on record today to state that we are in opposition to any changes in the taxation of wind energy developments, particularly in this situation with the current Chokecherry Sierra Madre wind farm project entering into.
Ms. Bach, you do know that we're not considering a tax today, right?
We just want to state that just based upon the discussion here today, that the city was concerned that it would create additional uncertainty in this project and uncertainty for wind energy development. And we just want to be on record as opposing any future changes to the wind energy taxation.
Yes, thank you. I think we'll be having this discussion at our next meeting. So
thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for Ms. Bach? Who's next? Mr. McCarville.
Senator Pate, I just wanted to make sure in that last presenter with Ms. Bach, there were 4 or 5 people in the room. While you had them all, if there is anyone.
You bet. I didn't realize.
I think
I heard that, but I'm just seeing your grid ceiling.
So maybe she's already gone.
Well, we can come back to them if they want. Mr. Carville.
Yes, good afternoon, committee. Sean McCarville, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, representing IBEW Locals 322, 415, 612 in the state of Wyoming. I just wanted to speak again on behalf of your Wyoming resident workers and encourage you to look at alternatives to this tax, as these projects in particular with the changes in the electric generation industry are valuable assets for training and keeping our Wyoming electrical workers busy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carville. Mr. Carville, we've been talking about existing property level taxes and existing generation taxes so far today. We're not really talking about new taxes, but do you want to change the level of existing taxes? Is that your testimony? Maybe lower them? Sorry, Mr. Carville, do you hear me?
There, I believe I can hear you again. I apologize.
In case I cut out, we've just been talking about how property and generation tax is assessed now and implemented now. Is your testimony that we should change those levels of taxes, maybe lower them?
No, sir.
Got it. Thank you, Mr. Carville.
You're welcome.
Back to the city. Oh, first, are there questions for Mr. Carville? Any questions? Was there anybody else at the city of Rollins that wanted to weigh in when we were?
Mr. Chairman, we do have additional speakers that would like to say a few words.
Mr. Chairman and committee members, my name is Terry Wycombe, and I used to be a county commissioner, and I was part of the Wind Task Force Committee for the County Commissioners Association to try to figure out the taxation and what are we going to do with wind energy and that sort of thing. The very fact that we're discussing wind taxation again makes me and everybody involved with wind taxation kind of nervous. There's a lot of uncertainty about it, and I hope that you can decide what you're going to do. This is the 10th or 12th time that I've testified in front of the Revenue Committee about wind taxation, and I think if we change it, we cause an uncertainty that could really hurt Carbon County. We don't have coal. We have some oil and gas, and it's pretty steady, but we don't really have a lot of coal, but we have a lot of wind energy, and we want to keep it. I'm not going to bore you with any more, but I hope I don't have to testify another 10 times. It was settled, and now it just upsets the whole industry, and so I hope you can not do this. One of the reasons that we didn't rezone those properties and that we allowed them to have special use permits was that we had these ranches that wanted to put in wind farms. When the wind farm goes away, it goes back to being a ranch. Once you start taxing them or you start calling them an industrial place, then when that wind farm goes away, now we have a animal processing plant, completely different animal. Please don't mix that up. I would be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Any questions for Mr. Wickham? Any questions? Mr. Wickham, I have no idea how the property would be classified as industrial and whether it would go back. I think that's kind of maybe a Department of Revenue question. We learned that that's at the Department of Revenue, not at the local assessor. So.
But just so you don't destroy the whole special use permit situation, I don't mind having wind farms, but if it does change the classification of that land for taxation purposes, that could open up another bucket of worms that would allow things to take place after the wind farm that might not be as palatable.
That's a good point. I don't have an answer for you. Maybe the Department of Revenue will help us out.
Anything else?
I'm good. Anybody else? I think we're good. Thank you, Mr. Wickham.
Thank you for taking time.
Anybody else in Rollins? Okay, we'll go to Mr. Darren with Mr. Darren.
Yes, good afternoon, Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, members of the committee, Tom Darren with the American Wind Energy Association. Appreciate the discussion today on the valuation of wind at the local level in Wyoming. And I guess I just want to stress these 2 points. One, we want to continue to work with the legislature and the Department of Revenue about how we're taxed, and appreciate that opportunity today to learn more. And just number two, in that regard, I think the context is helpful to note that for the private land leases in question, the wind turbines themselves take up about 1/4 to 1/2 of an acre each. And that overall, and we have BLM studies and other things we can provide to the committee, the actual wind footprint comprises about 2% of the entire leased acreage. So 98% is left available and is often continued to be used for traditional agricultural and ranching operations. And, I think that context is important in this kind of discussion about how the private property lease is taxed. Just wanted to bring that up. And finally, just to note that the Department of Revenue guidance seems to, head in that direction in their September of 2016 guidance, pages 5 and 6, where they point out a sample wind lease that has these exact same acreages per turbine. So just wanted to bring that up in terms of is it agricultural? Is it converted to industrial conversation? And I thank you for the opportunity to bring those up today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Darren. It's good to see you. Committee, any questions for Mr. Darren? And then, so Mr. Darren, the thing you're referring to is from the Department of Revenue. It's a 2016 document.
September of 2016.
Maybe if Department of Revenue is online, they could provide us with a copy of that. Really appreciate that. When you're talking about the percentage use of the land, can you explain that a little bit better? So I'd imagine you've got roads and you've got the actual foundation and where the tower sits. I assume that the percentages that are used don't include the sweep of the blades above your head, right? I mean, I'm just asking. It seems like cows could still be in there and all that kind of stuff. So is that what you're talking about when you talk about those percentages?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Yes, the percentages are looking at the land itself. So 2-dimensional, X by Y, not X by Y by Z, meaning the vertical component.
And not the overhang of the blades.
We're looking at, first and foremost, the amount of land itself on the ground, just to be clear, that's occupied by the wind turbine and the cement foundation, like you mentioned. Right. And we are also adding in some element of roads and maybe a building structure or two to house supplies and things for maintenance. But again, overall, when you look at, let's say, 1,000-acre lease, you might have 200 acres that are affected by wind, and 9,800 acres in that hypothetical that are still used by Wyoming ranchers and agricultural producers for their existing operations.
Can recreationalists use those lands?
Well, the hypothetical here, Mr. Chairman, is a private landowner. So that would depend on the access, provided by the private landowner to a recreationalist.
Do you have agreements with the private landowners about things like hunting?
I don't know that for certain, so I don't want to speculate, Mr. Chairman, on something I don't know the answer to. I do remember in some other work I've done in Wyoming that private landowners leasing out for oil and gas do sometimes have those provisions for hunters and recreation, but I just don't know the answer if our wind developers do that.
Okay, thank you. If I want to find out more about that, how could I do that?
you could work with me. I could find, so just so I'm clear, the question would be, the way our leases are worded with private landowners about access to others, for others.
Correct. And there
I
may
could,
be,
yeah.
I'm so sorry. I'm just thinking there might be activities that might not be fully compatible with wind turbines. Hunting might be one of them. I'm just thinking of bullets and fiberglass. I don't know. And maybe that's restricted. Maybe it's not. I'd be very interested in learning more about all that.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I will continue to work with our members on some of these things. I do know a lot of the leasing matters are proprietary, but we do want to work as much as we can with the committee on getting the answers to these questions.
Thank you so much. I see that Senator Ellis has a question.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kind of along those lines, I'm just thinking about how, wind is a source of power. Wouldn't it be also considered critical infrastructure? So I think we need to be sensitive to what we're really asking and kind of the reality of the operation, because certainly we wouldn't want to endanger anything that's providing power to our country.
Of course not. Thank you very much, Senator Ellis. Any other questions for Mr. Darren? Thank you, Mr. Darren. You've been great as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Who's next? I'm looking. I see Kendall Roberts. I see that name. Am I missing somebody else that's waiting? Mr. Roberts?
It's actually, if you can hear me, it's actually Mark Isley. I'm routing through my daughter Kendall's.
Okay. So you can start your video if you like, or you don't have to.
There we go. Can you see me?
You certainly can.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
That was rhetorical. I'm Mark Isley. I'm a Laramie County rancher, and I'm also past president of Wyoming Stock Growers, and I'm currently the vice chairman of policy for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. I bring those points up, Mr. Chairman and the committee, thank you for having me today. I'm getting ahead of myself. I bring those points up today because I've read some editorials and heard some gossip that the livestock organizations have opposed wind farms, and that is absolutely not true. We have no opposition to wind farms. In fact, I know you're discussing taxation today, but I want to get a couple of elements in here for you to think about as background. One of them is that we view this as a private property right. We know some people don't like them. We know some people aren't bothered by them, but we feel this is an affront to the property rights, personal property rights, the ability to continue to foster that. There. Am I back on?
We can't hear Kale.
Can you hear me?
Us here.
We seem to be having problems on our end, everybody. We get, the wind gods don't like us and are muting us, but anyway, no, it's just a joke, but I'm sorry. So Mr. Isley, we couldn't hear you, and then we were muted as well, and I don't know why. So we heard you talk about, the last thing I really heard was you dispelled the rumor that the cattlemen and other organizations were anti-wind. You said that's not true. And that's about the last thing that we heard here in Cheyenne. So
no, you did, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You didn't miss too much beyond that. We just feel it's a private property right that needs to, let's back up some more. The state of Wyoming invited wind developers into the state under the preview of no generation taxes. Then I get in here, you change the rules of the game. Well, any businessman doesn't like that. You need to pick a policy and stick with it. The reason that we see that as an affront to the private property rights is because if you prevent the development of those farms and folks that are going with uncertainty of livestock markets, like the certainty of a revenue check, Yes, recreational activities are allowed under some of these farms. Most of those are confidential agreements between the developers and the landowners. You know, as far as tourism, I've also heard about the complaints of tourism, that the tourists don't want to come here because they see these. I have yet to hear a single person say that, and I have worked with this both regionally and nationally, and I have seen absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. There's plenty of open space, and if you want to talk about open space, let's save some ranches, and then we've saved the rest of the open space, which is probably 99.5% of it. You know, the money is spent here locally. Anything that a landowner gets in revenue, he rolls it back in his ranch, which means purchases at the local level. 3 to 5 times rollover, depending which economist you talk to. You know, they don't tax the counties because it doesn't require the uses of roads for schools. It doesn't take snow removal, fire, police, any of those services that are really expensive when you start developing with housing developments and those sort of things. And I think those things are really important as we go into this. We'll probably visit the generation tax discussion again sometime, but it's sure discouraging. I know that in my discussions with our surrounding states, they're laughing at us. They actually hope we pass a generation tax and push this thing forward so they can get the business and generate that money themselves, especially in their local economy. So I'll kind of let it go at that. Thank you very much for your time today. I'd sure entertain any questions if anybody on the committee has them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Isley. Questions for Mr. Isley? Any questions? Mr. Isley, is leasing your land to wind turbines, wind farms, is that a good deal?
It has been a tremendous, Mr. Chairman, it has been a very good deal for us. I have brought my adult children back to the ranch. We were able to purchase some property next to us to join the ranch. We prevented that from going into development, and it provided thousands of acres of wildlife habitat that would have gone under and never come back again. And for us, reclamation is a huge deal. That's going to be done properly. And one last comment on that. My predecessor, Ann King, was an enormous...
You're good.
Got it? Okay. Thank you. My predecessor, Ann King, was an enormous bird lover, was a counter and spotter for both Game and Fish and the Audubon Society. And I think we might have had one bird kill that was confirmed by Fish and Wildlife Service in 13 years. 13 years. And she said that was nothing compared to roadkill and accidental power line strikes and vehicular hits. So I think we did a good thing all the way around. And the cattle have adapted, the wildlife have adapted, they're fine. And the companies were incredibly sensitive to relocating some of the turbines to allow some of those species to survive. And it cost them millions to probably do that. They did the right thing. And I was really proud of that. They worked with us day to day, consulted us on everything that took place. And I know that even on this last edition, I think Laramie County, and I think this is a matter of public record, I don't have it in front of me, I think it generated an additional $3 million in sales tax, if I'm correct. So I might need to be corrected on that. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Isley. Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to make you aware that I don't think he's going to testify today, but we did get testimony from the Stockgrowers Association in total opposition to any wind tax. So, you referenced that you'd been a past president, so appreciate the input today. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Sweeney. So Mr. Isley, do you think that Wyoming ranchers are have higher valued leases than ranches in other states for wind leasing?
That's a good question. And I don't have that answer at my fingertips. I think they're probably fair and maybe even above. It depends on, it's the typical real estate credo, location, 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 and where those transmission lines are going to be at. and I have offered solutions or suggestions on easing the burden on the transmission lines. It hasn't all been taken under advisement, but I have been consulted on it. So I'm still really, maybe guardedly, but optimistic of the future it has here. I still support our fossil fuel stuff. I think it's great. I have friends and family that work in those industries. I think this is still a proponent, but we can't penalize the industry for wanting to come and build here when we invited them in the first place.
Right, thank you, Mr. Isley. But I guess I'm getting at the point where I think private landowners are doing pretty well with wind leases in Wyoming. And I'm so happy for that. I'm just wondering if Wyoming seems to be a little bit more lucrative on the private end than other states and really doing very well, maybe there's money to be made even for the state of Wyoming in terms of our worst financial crisis ever. And I realize you're opposed to any taxes, but we're all working after the same pie, perhaps. And I'd appreciate your comments on that, thinking that if landowners can command premiums and very good deals, why couldn't the state also with our tax structure, which despite what's been said, I think the evidence really is going to come down on we're not that high tax when you consider all the taxes. So I appreciate your comments on that.
I believe that those deals are important. Most of them are confidentially held, but this is emotional because we all know the state of Wyoming is in financial straits, so to speak, and we all want to do our part. But if you kill an industry before it has a chance to come back around and make those donations or those contributions to the economies, the discussion is pretty useless.
Although you got to agree with me, they seem to be making pretty good contribution to private landowners.
Well, and the contribution that the landowners make to local economies is enormous. And a lot of those landowners have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars through the past years through their operations. So I've used up a lot of my time, Mr. Chairman. So unless there's any other questions, I'll give the floor back to somebody else.
Well, thank you, Mr. Isley. I can see that we got Representative Blackburn.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mark. Good afternoon, Mark. How you doing?
Good afternoon.
Thanks for coming to testify. I don't see enough of you, but I just have one question. As landowners, the chairman's indicated that landowners probably making pretty good wages off windmills. How often do you have to renegotiate, or do you have to renegotiate your contracts?
Mr. Isley?
Yes, Representative Blackburn, one of the things that happens, and it's done on a case-by-case and company-by-company basis, I'm sure. We did ours on a 10-year stepped-up basis, 10 years to give the companies an opportunity to recapitalize their investment and then renegotiate after that. I believe the consideration is most systems need to be repowered after 20 years, and so they're more efficient and just the machinery's worn out, so to speak. So I think that's probably where we're at. Hope that answers your question.
That does, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Isley. Thank you, Representative Blackburn. Any other questions for Mr. Isley? Thank you so much, Mr. Isley. Congratulations.
Thank you so much for taking this under consideration today.
Yeah. Let's see, do we got anybody else that wishes to address the committee? I'm not seeing anybody, but I'm missing. Anybody in the audience here?
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Come on forward. We have somebody in Cheyenne.
Mr. Chairman, I think there's one more in Rollins.
Okay, we'll go back to Rollins after the gentleman in Cheyenne, if that's all right. Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chairman, good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me a few moments to speak. My name is Rob Boner. I am representing our family ranch north of Douglas, Wyoming.
Yes, sir.
Actually, I would maybe try to offer a couple of thoughts to some of your questions, Chairman Case.
And did you say your name was Bonner?
Rob Boner, yes.
So Brian
is my son.
Oh,
yes, sir.
You must be very proud. He's a great senator.
Yeah, my wife and I are very proud of him. Initially, one of your first questions was recreation and hunting use, and I have reported to the Wyoming Game and Fish through the siting and permitting process that our lease allows guided hunting, which is no different than what we've already done for years. We are leased out to an outfitter. All of our acreage is open for guided hunting, except for during construction periods, just because of safety. So in essence, no change in our game operation. My second point would like to make is, I know we're not talking about increasing the generation taxation or taxation rate today, but you asked a question about how are the landowners doing with wind. And really the reason why I'm here, our history is we started studying, understanding wind in 2004. I attended many conferences to understand the economic models of wind power. Entered negotiations with Pacificor in 2007. And eventually came to an agreement with Pacificor. When you ask about how the landowners are doing and why the per megawatt taxation is such a concern for me, is that we took off the table from what our millage royalty rate is 87 cents a megawatt hour less with the current wind generator, which obviously is a project going on in Converse County right now. So we took 87 cents a megawatt hour off of what we had negotiated with Pacificor in 2007, 2008, off of our current agreement in order to make the economics work for this project. As a result of that, this project got done, and it's generating tens, hundreds of millions of dollars for Commerce County and this state. $1 megawatt hour will make a large difference in whether renewable energy comes to this state or does not. And I say that not out of opinion. I say that out of hours and hours spent building my own spreadsheets for analyticals, understanding the economical models. I am absolutely confident that $1 megawatt hour doesn't sound like a lot, will end up generating minimal, if any, activity for this state. That is my testimony, Mr. Chairman. I would be welcome any questions.
Thank you, sir. Well, I'm glad you came.
Thank you.
Are there questions for Mr. Bonner? Bonner? I'm not seeing any on the screen. Okay. Mr. Bonner, I've got a couple though. So this is a wind farm that's on your ranch or partly on your ranch?
Yes. The Cedar Spring is partially on our ranch.
And that's a ranch that you have with your children?
My brothers, all brothers, children, several family members, yes.
Including Senator Bonner?
Yes, he's my son.
And then if I understand your testimony that you took your lease that was being negotiated and you discounted it by 87 cents.
Not because, so we had a lease agreement in 2008. With the financial crisis, the mortgage meltdown 2008, that went away.
Right.
Then negotiations started with another company in probably 2011.
I see.
And in order to get that lease done and this project done, the difference in our revenue is 87 cents a megawatt hour less than what the agreement was with Pacificor in 2008.
And then help me, sir, when was the second project, the one that went through?
Well, it's being constructed right now.
Oh,
This is the Cedar Springs project in Commerce County.
So it's been 12 years and the price went down 87.
Well, we actually negotiated that agreement, I believe the date's 2014 was the initial. So it was roughly 6 years difference.
Okay. So in 6 years, you had to lower your price by 87 cents a megawatt hour.
Correct.
So is your lease based on the production amounts? I take it must be, or at least in part.
Well, I think all wind leases are based on generated in different manners and generated product.
That's probably why we came up with the generation tax in the first place, probably. But your testimony is that our tax caused you to lower by 87 cents.
It is not that. My testimony is that these projects are very price sensitive.
Yes.
And that a $1 a megawatt increase in the generation tax, in my opinion, would greatly impact whether these projects, future projects, get done.
Thank you. Point well made. Committee, anything else? Representative Blackburn, do I see that you have your?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I didn't see you.
Mr. Boner, so I'm just having a real hard time with this 83 cents per megawatt hour. When I'm thinking about, everybody's upset because the state of Wyoming wants to raise these taxes, but 1 megawatt actually powers like 650 homes. 83 cents is not a lot. If we raised it $1 a megawatt hour or $2 a megawatt hour, that doesn't seem to be, I'm not saying that I'm for this tax, against this tax, I'm probably for this tax. Doesn't seem like a lot to give or to take from the electric company. Mr. Boner, can you answer that for me? I guess I don't know where I'm going with this 83 cents.
Mr. Boner, go ahead. Thank you.
Just for clarification, it's 87 cents rather than 83.
Yeah. Representative Blackburn always screws things up.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Blackburn. Sorry about the jab. I was just trying to bring.
I'd like to hear Mr. Boner answer the question. So the 83 cents that you gave up, I don't know how many megawatt hours, makes no difference. But if the state wanted to charge these manufacturers $1 a megawatt hour, it doesn't seem like a lot to me. Where are you standing on that?
I would agree.
Thank you, Representative Blackburn. I'm sorry for the levity. I think there was some confusion, Representative Blackburn, about 87 or 83 cents. I'm not sure it really makes much difference, but I'm going to yield to Mr. Boner to answer your question. Go ahead.
So, Representative Blackburn, I am not in opposition to the current tax structure. I would be strongly opposed to any increases in that tax structure.
Okay.
Because I think it would have a significant impact on whether this activity takes place. Again, I would reference, a private property issue here. We're going to tax things so much that one of the bundles in one of the sticks in our bundle of rights gets almost basically eliminated because these projects are no longer economical. And what I would say, Representative Blackburn, is that I absolutely believe that another $1 a megawatt hour would make a difference. That is my firm and absolute testimony. An additional $1.
Thank you, sir. Are we good, Representative Blackburn?
We're good.
Thank you very much. I'm looking, I think we'd said we'd go back to Rollins.
Thank you for
Thank you, Mr. Boner.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
Congratulations on having a great son. Thank you. Must have a bunch of them. Back to Rollins. Did we have testimony in Rollins?
Yes, you do, Mr. Chairman. My name is Dr. Travis Moore. I'm a Carbon County Commissioner, but today I'm here on behalf of the Carbon County Council of Governments, which consists of the 10 municipalities and, of course, Carbon County. I'm not going to belabor the issue about the taxation, which has been pushed to your December meeting. So I'm not going to make comments about that. A tip of the hat to Representative Sweeney to seeing me with my hand up earlier. Thank you, Representative. But during this trying time, my entire life and 4 generations of my family here in Carbon County, we've embraced energy. I hope we continue to embrace energy. I wish you all good health and a happy Thanksgiving. I'll reserve my specific remarks for the taxation issue for December. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for the gentleman? Thank you very much.
That was pretty cool.
What other testimony do we have? I think I see Ms. Kessler, Stephanie Kessler.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee, and apologies that I cannot share my video. I keep getting little messages about that because I have very anemic internet living in a rural location. And I've used up my phone hotspot juice to try to do video, so I hope audio works. I'm going to be very brief today because I appreciate the clarity that the tax bill is going to be up at your next meeting, and I'll save my testimony really for that time. But given the conversation I've heard regarding the 2019 University of Wyoming study that compares the diversity of taxation of wind in Wyoming to other neighboring states and evaluates our competitive stance regarding those, I would suggest that that study get put on your docket of materials for your December meeting because it seems like it's being debated here and there's some good background in there. And I certainly think that you could ask one of the authors of that University of Wyoming study to show up and answer some questions about it as well. And that would be probably just some good policy background as you look into this perspective further. And that's really all I have to say for now.
Questions for Ms. Kessler? Dr. Hallinan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder if our testimonial, our patient, our individual making her testimony here would comment on the $40 a megawatt hour they pay in California versus the dollar that we're talking about raising this tax. It doesn't seem like that's a very big portion of that cost. And I wonder why people here are so convinced that raising this tax by $1 will cause us to lose all these businesses to our state. I don't think it's very likely. And I wonder why so many of you people think that it is. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Hallinan, or Dr. Hallinan, we're not really doing the tax today. We're going to do your bill at the next meeting. But Ms. Kessler, you certainly can speculate if you'd like.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Hallinan, thank you. And I realized I forgot to introduce myself because I was introduced by my state senator, but I am Steph Kessler with the Wyoming Outdoor Council. Regarding the representative's question, it's my understanding that we are in a free marketplace, competitive market here with other states. And although I do not know the details about the $40 megawatt California price, I do know that other states are competing with us to win that market. And as we know, with free market forces, they're going to go with the least expensive that can fulfill their needs. And so it's more about the competition from other states than maybe what California might be willing to pay. But I'd be glad to just look into that more and come back if I find out some more information at your next meeting.
Is that okay, Dr. Hallinan? Seems reasonable.
I think it is reasonable. However, it seems like we've got all of these companies that want to come to Wyoming. And I wonder why, if we charge more taxes, why do they want to come to our state? And I really find it unlikely that they would want to if we're overcharging for this product. And it looks like we have plenty of contestants for our state's production of wind. So with that in mind, I'd like to hear at our next meeting what these folks have to say to that question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Kessler, you're welcome to say anything now, or you can take him up at about the next meeting.
Mr. Chairman and committee, I don't have any more to say now, but it's some good questions are being raised.
Thank you. And let's see if there are other questions. Any other questions for Ms. Kessler? I might have a couple. Ms. Kessler, you represent a outdoor environmental based organization, correct?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chairman, yes.
Is your organization concerned about the environmental effects of impacts of wind development in Wyoming?
Yes, absolutely. And Mr. Chairman, that's what I was going to cover in my testimony when there's an actual bill to consider. Our membership is very ambivalent and mixed on this topic. And due to the late hour on a Friday afternoon, I thought I could just cover that at your next meeting. But that's definitely an issue which is at play with some of this conversation for sure.
Ms. Kessler, forgive me, but I believe you testified at the Corporations Committee last week. And in that testimony, you said that you'd really rather see the siting difficulties of wind and the impacts on the landscape and the environment handled more under siting rules. Is that what I understood?
Mr. Chairman, that's pretty close to it. The point that I tried to bring before corporations was that what we're hearing from the public is a concern about appropriate siting of these facilities, that they're in the right location. And even folks that are opposed to some current projects today recognize that there can be some appropriate locations for large-scale renewable projects. And so our position is not an either or, but we can take the time to do it right and design a program that sites these facilities in the correct locations so that we can have the benefit of the economic development for our state. And I will admit for our members also a desire to see some clean energy, as well as also protecting Wyoming values like wildlife, public lands, and view sheds. But that we have to use the right regulatory tool to get there. And the point I raised at Corporations Committee is that higher taxes is not the appropriate tool if you're trying to address a location problem, because companies could decide they can pay the taxes and still come in and site in awful places that really impact our Wyoming values. And so we are just trying to make a point that if the real problem is the siting of these facilities, let's make sure we design or use a tool to address that. And taxation may only either drive these companies away entirely, and then you could lose the benefit of the other positive trade-off, which could be more economic development for our state and a transition to a cleaner fuel source.
Ms. Kessler, would you support stronger laws about siting wind?
Absolutely. In fact, Mr. Chairman, there is currently a group of stakeholders from around the state that are working with the University of Wyoming Hobbs School to look at this issue. And they represent a diversity of interests from around the state that I understand have come together to try to come up with some ideas.
So, Ms. Kessler, based on that absolutely question, I have to question why you and your organization worked to weaken a siting bill that was on the legislature's docket last year. And that was the siting of wind and solar facilities. And I believe you did work to weaken that bill from what was originally proposed. You might talk about that a little bit.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. Most respectfully, I think the devil is in the details. If you recall those meetings, we very strongly advocated for a proactive approach to siting. And in fact, the Corporations Committee adopted as one of their interim study topics to bring before Management Council that very proposal for a more proactive, forward-thinking siting process, that instead of reacting at the level of when a permit is already coming before the Industrial Siting Council and a company has spent millions of dollars already investigating a site, that we actually as a state put ourselves in the driver's seat and think proactively about where it is appropriate to put these large facilities and to incentivize that. And then we can disincentivize the places that conflict with our wildlife and other resources. So I would just respectfully say the devil is in the details of the regulatory mechanisms you use, and we sought to have a proactive approach for Wyoming instead of a reactive approach.
Are you bringing a proactive approach to this legislature?
Mr. Chairman, I can tell you that since Management Council struck the proactive siting approach from Corporations Committee, that we have been working since May to help stakeholders convene to work on this independent of the legislature and to develop proposals that can have the benefit of that vetting to bring to your attention at the next session.
Do you intend to include the legislature or members of the legislature in your development of this proposal?
Mr. Chairman, at this point, I don't control the process, so I really can't respond to that. I understand that it's based on working with many other people.
Thank you very much.
But certainly the ideas are hopefully going to be brought to the legislature for sure.
We'll look forward to that. Thank you. Anybody else? Questions for Ms. Kessler? Thank you, Ms. Kessler. Committee, I'm not seeing anybody else wish to testify. I'm not, Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just would remind everybody that they did get a letter from one of my constituents, Hall Trucking. He was unable to testify today because of a COVID-related illness in his family. So,
is that H-A-L-L or H-A-U-L?
H-A-L-L.
Thank you, Representative Sweeney. We'll look for that letter. Anybody else? Any comments? I think we're at the point of our agenda now, committee discussions and directives. And then we have general public comment, and then we're done for the day. Anything for the good of the order? Representative Sweeney.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask, I think part of the frustration with the wind industry is that we have talked about this so many times before my days in the legislature, and they're just looking for, you know, what direction are we heading? And so I would ask, is it proper if we could take a vote of the committee on if we want to continue this discussion into the December meeting, or if we can be done with it at this meeting?
So Representative Sweeney, we did take a vote on Representative Hallinan's bill, and we agreed that we would have that brought forward. And we still have yet to do that. So, you know, unless you want to move for reconsideration and go through that again, we probably owe it to the good doctor to listen to his bill and decide what we want to do with that. We also have a management council directive to look at general electricity taxes. So we'll probably put a couple versions of the general electricity tax on our next meeting to complete our management council directive. And as far as I think that would end it for now. Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With all due respect, where is Dr. Hallinan's bill?
I have not seen it yet. Dr. Hallinan, it's your bill draft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The last I heard was that LSO had a copy of it. I thought it was going to be brought up at this meeting, but it's not there. So I guess we're going to have it dealt with next meeting.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a straight up or down vote. I actually have not seen the bill. I'm not sure if it's because you haven't released it yet. I know what the bill says, and I think we all know what this bill says, but and I have not seen the fiscal note that accompanies that. My understanding is that hasn't been prepared yet. The only fiscal note that I have seen regarding wind taxation was with regard to the one in corporations, which is to eliminate the exemption.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly we'll have all that information and time to go over it before our next meeting.
Absolutely.
Shall we move on?
We wouldn't have it today. That's got to be on the agenda for the next meeting.
Right. I make a motion, we go to dinner.
Should we go to general public comment first, or how about Mr. Co-Chair, did you have anything before we went to general public comment?
No, I just wanted to mention, I do believe we have a public comment, or one of our newest city council women from the middle of the state would like to address us.
Okay, I'm going to look at the waiting room, and
I just admitted her.
Great, thank you very much. And who is that?
Amber Pollock.
Oh, Ms. Pollock. Hello.
Hi, greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, and members of the committee. My name is Amber Pollock. I am speaking to you today. I've spoken to many of you on a number of different issues, but today as the new president of Engage, which is a nonpartisan grassroots group of 18 to 35-year-olds located both inside and outside of Wyoming, but all with Wyoming roots. So everyone was born in Wyoming. Some still live here. Some have moved. For those of you who aren't familiar with our group, I want to provide a brief overview of what we're up to, primarily just because it relates directly to what this committee is tasked with doing. So when Engage started, it was about 3 years ago, and it was a response to Endow and the lack of young people being invited into the conversation about what Wyoming's economy could look like in 20 years. I actually wasn't part of Engage at that time. I later was a member of the Endow Commission, and then shifted my efforts all the way over to focusing on just on Engage, because I like the grassroots nature of it more than the sort of government-led directive of Endow. But so now I'm working fully with Engage, and our intention was to do what our name suggests, which is to empower the next generations to advance and grow our economy. And I say next generations, plural, as in not just mine, not just 18 to 35-year-olds, but the ones coming after us as well. So as we have work towards that aim, we've hosted 2 annual summits. Weren't able to do one this year for obvious reasons, but we have hosted 2 where we attracted hundreds of folks from around the state in the 18 to 35-year-old demographic. We worked to get folks in that same demographic appointed to boards and commissions throughout the state. And we hosted a legislative luncheon in Cheyenne to bring our perspective and the perspective of young folks around the state to you. When we started, we had quite a wide range of initiatives and ideas of what we wanted to accomplish, including the things I mentioned, in addition to giving people tools to build coalitions in their own communities, to help influence some of the changes that they wanted to see. But I think tellingly, over the last 8 months, we have, I don't want to say we've thrown all of that out the window, but we have had to narrow our focus dramatically, specifically to Wyoming's revenue structure. And that is pretty much the sole focus of Engage now. The reason for that is that as we keep trying to talk about how we're going to build the Wyoming that we want to inherit, all roads keep leading back to revenue. They keep leading back to revenue structure. And we really don't think that we can truly empower our next generations to advance and grow in our economy under the current structure. And therefore, we have shifted gears to address that issue first. For us, when we talk about advancing and growing the economy, we're talking about leaving a prosperous economic system for next generations, not just a prosperous economy, but a system that's going to work for the next generations, that's going to work into the future. And we don't believe we have that right now. I'm not coming to you today. I signed up for general comment because we don't have particular stances on any of the bills that you've proposed yet today, because I think that tax policy is really complex and it's best left to folks that have all of the data and all the numbers in front of them, which is you. And instead wanted to just try to bring a few of our more general stances about what we hope the legislature will endeavor to undertake over this session and the next sessions. And keep in mind, when you're thinking about these difficult topics coming from the younger folks in Wyoming. So one thing that we are really passionate about at Engage is that oil and gas have done their job. We all benefited from an amazing education system, from a prosperous economy growing up. And we've reaped the benefits from that, and we would never want to turn our backs on that. But we believe it's time for other folks to share the burden. Right now, we've got so much of Wyoming's economy responsibility shouldered by just one industry, and we don't really believe that that is fair to them or to any of the rest of us in times like this when they're not really able to provide the types of revenue that we need to keep our municipalities and our states fully funded. That's the first thing. The second is that we don't believe that a no new taxes philosophy is fiscally responsible. I don't think it's a reality for us right now. None of us in Engage do. An honest discussion about what needs to happen. We know it's going to be a combination of cuts of revenue generation, of restructuring, a variety of things. But I think to say that anything's off the table right now is disingenuous. And I think that, we want to see what's on the table. We want to see what the possibilities are. And we want you all to have that conversation. Third, we want you to focus not just on what we can get by with, but what we need to do to position ourselves for the future. That includes investing, attracting industry, getting creative to find ways to grow the types of jobs we have here, and also create a revenue structure that will actually benefit the state when those types of jobs come here. Right now, I think there's an argument to be made that new business is bad for Wyoming, unless it's related to the extractive industry, the way our structure is set up right now. And to me, that's not a healthy situation for us to be in. Number 4, we spend a lot of time talking about how to keep young people here. I've heard that from the time I was 5 or 6 years old. How do we keep young people here? And as a young person and representing many other young people, some things that help: fully funded municipalities, good schools, jobs in our fields. Those are really what people are looking for when they're looking at where they're going to make their home. Engage is made up of about half folks who live here and half who have had to leave because they couldn't find a job in their field here. And they would love to come back if we were able to grow the opportunities here to bring them back here. And last, we know it's not one silver bullet, rather a combination of revenue sources paired with what we hope can be some shorter term cuts, ones that aren't devastating to us in the long term, but necessary to get us through the difficult time that we're faced with right now. But what we're asking is that you reject a no new taxes approach, that you get options on the table and look at developing a structure, an economic structure that will work for my generation and the ones coming after me. Thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you so much. So great to see you, and congratulations on working with Engage. And I would just like to see if the committee has any questions for you. Kathy, Representative Conley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Pollock, for being here. First, I think congratulations are in order that you were recently elected to the Casper City Council, if I'm not mistaken. So congratulations, and again for that public service and stepping up and being chair of Engage. But my question for you is, and actually we even see your email address is as a business owner, and you're one of the owners of Backwoods Distilling. First of all, I very much enjoy your products, but I am curious about you as a business owner and the discussion that we had earlier this morning, and it ultimately became about a personal income tax, but about a corporate tax. And again, it would be a small one, and I'd be willing with your final comments about put everything on the table, if that too is something, even as a business owner, that you think that we should be looking at.
Yeah, Chairman, Representative Conley, I think everything needs to be on the table. I don't think it's really fair of us, and it's not in good faith of us to say, find new taxes, but don't tax me. Don't let me be affected, right? I think that the conversation that we need to be having is, we all need to chip in, and obviously we want taxes that are going to be the least impactful and make the least change on people's individual lives, but ultimately be able to keep our collective services funded. So for me, I want to contribute to my community. I want to make sure that we've got strong, I've got a strong place to do business. I want to make sure that it's a place people want to be. If they don't want to be there, they don't need to come to my business. So for me, as long as it's small, it's reasonable. I think it should be on the table. I would be happy as a business owner to pay. And in fact, I think that the state should benefit from successful businesses like mine, right? If my business grows and I'm able to, have a lot of success as a business owner, that should mean that my state and my community prosper as well in return for that. And so, because we do I'm using infrastructure, I'm using, some of it I pay for, but I'm certainly using, the roads, I'm using, a lot of things that Casper has to maintain, or that the state has to maintain in order to be able to do my business. So to me, it's fair, and it should be, we can't just point the finger of like, as long as I'm not the one getting taxed, then I'm in favor of it. I don't think that's fair. I think people need to step up and chip in a little. If we all do a little, then I think that we'll be able to, support our communities and our state going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Conley and Ms. Pollock. I see Representative Baker has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Pollock. I have a statement and a question. And my statement is this: I wonder if there's an appetite for tasking the Department of Revenue to explore what revenue figures would look like in Wyoming based on other states' figures if Wyoming were to legalize and tax cannabis, either recreational or medically. And all that, the Endow bill, I remember voting on that bill and supporting that bill. And as part of, as a freshman, the advice that I was given is always try to work bills to make them so that you can support them. And so I offered an amendment on the Endow bill to include distribution of cannabis. And so I wonder, because part of what your statement is we want to keep people here and we don't want them to leave the state. And I think part of that entails is they don't want to be criminals. Our citizens and our younger population don't want to be criminals for something that's readily available in other states. So could you comment, has engaged in that conversation at all?
Ms. Pollock, wow.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Baker, we haven't gotten into the specifics of that, though. When we do our summits, we poll a broad group of folks, and I can at least attest to the fact that it has come up in individuals' comments about when they're throwing out ideas of things that they would like to see in our state. It's not something that we have an official position, as I mentioned. I don't know what is going to be the best mix of solutions for us here, but so I can't say. I don't know that that'll be our lowest hanging fruit possibility, though I do know that other states have reaped economic benefits from those types of changes, decriminalization, et cetera. So, you know, I think options should be on the table, as I said before, and I think that you know, there's certainly many young people that have an interest in that, but engage as a body. We haven't taken any sort of vote if we would support this type of tax or this type of tax, you know, to come down on specific issues. But
Thank you, Ms. Pollock, and thank you, Representative Baker. Any other questions from Ms. Pollock? Thank you. I think we will be talking about that much more intensely in the future, and I appreciate the beginning of a conversation. Go ahead. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I see that we have Mr. Sniffen here. Would you like to make public comment?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Case and members of the committee. I know you've had a long couple of days, so I'll keep my remarks brief. I am Ron Sniffen. I'm the Executive Director for the Wyoming Education Association, and we certainly appreciate the difficult work that you are facing during these challenging times. Wyoming's education system is considered the best in the West on many national scales, and as you know, as is indicated in several reports. As you've heard earlier today, and even just a moment ago, several people have testified that the reason they live in Wyoming and do business in Wyoming is because of the high quality of education that we have here. The WEA represents 6,000 members around the state, and we proudly work to provide the best education possible that we can. Within our governing documents, and our largest democratic deliberative body is what's called our Delegate Assembly. Within our governing documents, we're on record to support using all appropriate alternatives to provide reliable, consistent funding needed, including increased taxes as needed and considering all potential forms of taxation to provide the best possible education that we can for the students of Wyoming. We're fortunate that in the Wyoming State Constitution, our forefathers said that a high quality education is a fundamental right, like freedom of speech and freedom of religion. So now it's up to us to make sure that we provide and continue to provide that high quality education. And it's up to us to do it, and we're here to help you however we can. With that, Chairman Case, I'll answer any questions.
Certainly, thank you, Mr. Sniffen. Questions for Mr. Sniffen? Are there any questions for Mr. Sniffen? Mr. Sniffen, I think you got off easy. Thank you very much. Is there any other public comment? Am I missing any public comment? We have none in the room in Cheyenne. In fact, the lights have went off around us. Anything else for the good of the order? And I just want, Senator Beitman, I think you were going to work on a program about PILT payments for our next meeting. Is that right?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. If that's still a possibility, I'd like at least an hour or so maybe to talk PILT, if that's okay with you.
It's fine with me, and I think I talked to the co-chairman about it. Anything else we need to take care of? We do have some bill drafts coming forward. I think we're good. Our next meetings, the dates still work. And I've been approached by folks that have said, well, why, if the session is going to be delayed, why couldn't we not rush a meeting into December? And I don't think we're really rushing it, but I do point out that the membership of the committee will change as the new members are sworn in at the first part of January. So this interim committee kind of goes away, even if the session doesn't actually start up because of the new swearing in and the new members and the reassignments. So I think there's no way out of but finishing our interim work with our meeting next month. There's no way around that. It'll be good and we'll be great. So anything else for the good of the order?
Is this what it feels like to be done with the Revenue Committee before 5 o'clock?
It is.
I like it.
This is 4:16 and I think we're done. They go a lot later in corporations. They have worse leadership, I think.
For now.
Representative Roscoe, were you trying to get the chair's attention?
Well, I'd like to push this to over 5 o'clock. No, I just, because Governor Hathaway was a hero of mine, I just saw this thing recently, and it seems to sum up the way I feel. And it was in one of his last interviews before he died in 2005. Former Republican Governor Stan Hathaway told journalist Sam Western that I passed the first severance tax, I got the permanent mineral trust fund, and they've earned Wyoming's expenses very well. But he added it bothered him that most people in Wyoming believed that they were getting a free ride. Hathaway did not intend for Wyomingites to get a free ride. The truth is, he said, we should all pay our share of government costs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Roscoe. That's a good note to leave on for the tax committee or not. But hey, safe driving if you're driving, and have a great weekend, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving. Let's hope this country gets out of this mess. Thank you very much.